Whether it's government secrets the public will never truly know, ghost ships, or strange happenings during the horror of war, there are plenty of military mysteries which have fascinated both serving men and civilians alike throughout the centuries. Number 5. The Phantom P40, or Ghost P40, is a mystery that has been baffling researchers for more than 60 years. Like many ghost stories, the exact details vary from telling to telling, but all have many similarities, and it's likely there's something they were all based upon. The most famous version of the story is set more than a year after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Radar detected a lone aircraft flying towards the US from the direction of Japan. It didn't have any of the hallmarks of a typical attack, and 2 pilots were sent out to intercept the mystery plane. When they got visuals on the plane, they discovered it wasn't an enemy aircraft. It was a P-40 bearing the insignia that had not been used since Pearl Harbor. Getting closer, they discovered that the aircraft was very damaged. It was riddled with bullet holes, and the landing gear, which was an important piece for such a heavy plane, was non-existent. Inside, the pilot was slumped over with red stains on his flight suit. But when the pilots pulled alongside, he lifted up a little, turned to smile at one of them, and waved. The plane then plummeted to the ground and crashed. Another version of the story is almost identical, but instead set in China. In the decades after the first sighting, there have been many other sightings in West China, Burma, and Thailand, supposedly helping US forces during excursions into these areas during the Vietnam War. While it sounds like a typical ghost story, it may actually have some truth to it. During the war, there was a group of American Army personnel stationed in the Philippines trying to block the Japanese. While there, they took delivery of a number of P-40 planes. Japan eventually took over the islands, and most of the American forces were forced to surrender. But many took to the jungle to launch guerrilla campaigns. A small group of pilots and mechanics on the island of Mindanao, which is often mentioned in legends of the Ghost P-40, maintained one of these planes for as long as they could. At one point, the landing gear fell away, but it still managed to land safely. Figuring there was only one flight left in her, the team created temporary landing gear from bamboo and stripped the P-40 of everything not needed for her to fly. She was also fitted with an extra fuel tank in the hopes of making it all the way to China. A mystery pilot took the plane and set off. Not long after the team put it together, they were captured. A plane matching this description did allegedly make it to China before crash landing. A small team of US men went to the wreckage where a number of letters and a partially burned diary were recovered, but Japanese troops approached before the pilot could be extracted. Who the mystery pilot was remains unknown, and the letters and diary have since been lost. Number 4. It was the early hours of the morning on July 1st, 1973, when 5 loud bangs rang out in an otherwise silent suburb of Chevy Chase, Maryland. Colonel Joseph Alone had just been returning home from a dinner party with his wife and was struck 5 times as he got out of his car. The person or people responsible for taking his life have never been found. Alone was an Israeli diplomat and military ambassador to the US. He'd held the position for almost 3 years and had been living happily in Maryland with his wife and 2 young daughters the entire time. But in the early summer of 1973, the family had noticed some strange things. It seemed like strangers were always watching their house, and they often received calls from an unknown person. They assumed it was part of some practical joke or perhaps paranoia, but they would be very wrong. The FBI launched an investigation into the crime. At the same time, a group in Cairo claimed responsibility for the hit. The so-called Voice of Palestine claimed it was retaliation for a hit on their own leader. But who exactly had been on the street in Maryland remained a mystery. Without much evidence, the case quickly went cold, and it was closed in 1976. Despite Alone's family asking the Israeli and US government to reopen the case, it wasn't until 2011 that a further development was made. An investigative journalist took an interest in the unsolved crime. He found the man who had taken over leadership of the group that had claimed responsibility. Elich Ramirez Sanchez was in prison in France at the time. The journalist wrote to him to ask if he knew anything about the act that had taken Alone's life. Sanchez said he did, but would only hand over that information at a price. The FBI took over at this point and interviewed Sanchez. He said it had actually been an American Vietnam War veteran who had taken Alone's life. He said that a small group had been living in America in the decades since. He insisted no Palestinians had been responsible for the act, though added that the veterans had been taking orders from another group closely linked to his own. How much of the information the FBI could believe is impossible to say. Sanchez had no real reason to offer them information. Even taking the information at face value, there doesn't seem to have been much progress in the years since, and the mystery remains unsolved. Number 3. The UB-95 was a German submarine in service during World War I that was plagued with such bad luck, many of the sailors wanted to see it be taken out of service. During its year-long life, it was the scene of numerous tragedies, and even ghost sightings. The events began before the sub was even finished. It was built in 1916, and was specially designed to be stationed in occupied Belgium, and work in the English Channel. During construction, 5 men lost their lives. 2 were involved in an accident when a steel girder fell from a crane, while another 3 suffocated on toxic gases. Things didn't get any better after it set sail in 1917. On its test run, a sailor was washed overboard while inspecting the hatches. Shortly before its first test drive, another sailor jumped overboard for apparently no reason. A few hours later, it looked like this man would be the crew's only survivor. During the drive, the sub hit the sea floor and would not resurface. A leak led to seawater rushing in. When it reached the batteries, a toxic fume was released. Luckily, the sub resurfaced at the last moment, but all the crew were violently sick, and 2 passed away in the hospital. The accidents would continue, and soon stories of the spirit of one of the fallen men began to circulate. It started with the lookout spotting a man on deck as they were preparing to dive. All the hatchings were closed, so there was no way for him to be on deck. When the man turned to look at the lookout, it was clear this was a second officer who had passed away in an accident not long earlier. The lookout had such a commotion the captain came up to see what was going on, and was also shocked to see the spirit. The ghost was spotted inside the sub and drove one man insane, prompting him to throw himself overboard. The UB-95 service ended in mysterious and dramatic fashion. It was spotted off the coast of England by a US vessel. As the US vessel lined itself up to attack, there was an explosion aboard the sub, and it sank. While much of the story of the cursed submarine has been embellished, if not entirely created out of thin air, the mysterious sinking is something that has been attested to in recent years. The submarine was found off the coast of England. Inspections found no signs of any attacks from an outside force, and what exactly happened in July of 1918 remains a mystery. Number 2. The story of Wanda Wilson, or more accurately her photograph, is one of the countless World War II mysteries that highlight the personal tragedies of the war. In August of 1943, a group of paratroopers were dropped into Bougainville Island in the South Pacific. It was another operation to try to liberate a small Pacific island from the Japanese. Sadly, every one of the paratroopers lost their lives in the battle. A few weeks later, another mission was launched. This wasn't some great liberation. It was an attempt to collect or bury the bodies of the troops that had already been lost. U.S. Marine Corporal Robert Goddard was one of the men sent to the island. Once again, the Japanese forces attacked and a firefight ensued. This time, though, the U.S. forces were able to overcome their attackers. At first, Goddard looked over the bodies of the men who had moments earlier been attacking him. It was a common, if not morbid practice at the time, to take souvenirs from fallen enemies, and Goddard was looking for one of his own. In the pocket of one of the soldiers, he found a newspaper clipping. He was astonished to find not only was the clipping in English, it looked like it had come from his hometown of St. Petersburg, Florida. The clipping was mostly a large headshot of a young woman described as Miss Wanda Laverne Wilson, a student at St. Petersburg Junior College. She had been chosen to represent the city in a beauty pageant. It was a surreal reminder of what was going on in Goddard's hometown while he was half a world away. After the war, Goddard made it his mission to find the girl and figure out why her photo had been in the pocket of a Japanese soldier. In 1945, he found her. Wanda Wilson was still living in St. Petersburg, working at Florida Power, and was engaged to a man named Frank Badger. Goddard showed up at her parents' home and asked if she was the girl in the photo. Wanda confirmed it was her. The beauty pageant took place in March of 1942, but she couldn't explain how it had ended up in the South Pacific. She didn't recognize the names of any of the men in Goddard's troop, or any of the paratroopers who had dropped onto the island before him. She didn't know anyone who would have met the Japanese soldier either. Wanda's friends and family always assumed it had been a random man who had taken the clipping as a reminder of home. Nobody she had any connection to, besides being a pretty face in a newspaper. But as Wanda passed away in 2012, it's unlikely the real identity of her admirer will ever be known. Number 1. Boscombe Down in Wiltshire, England, has been called the UK's Area 51. While stories of aliens haven't been attracted to the base as much as its US counterpart, its focus on experimental aircraft explains the comparison. That only became all the more clear in 1994, when the mysterious Boscombe Down incident occurred. At the time, the base was under the control of the Ministry of Defense's Defense Test and Evaluation Organization. It's likely many once top-secret aircraft spent some time here before being used in the UK and US operations. But in September of 1994, residents nearby reported hearing a loud rumbling they'd never heard before. According to news reports, it sounded like a freight train or a low-frequency rumbling. There was little said about the incident at the time, and many had already begun to forget about it when on September 26th, the incident occurred. An unknown aircraft tried to take off from Boscombe Down, but the pilots abandoned takeoff. Shortly after, London Air Traffic Control was told to take the runway out of service. There was something blocking it. Witnesses on the ground reported the aircraft had already been covered in a tarp, but it was clear by the way it was angled that something had broken at the front of the craft. Emergency service vehicles surrounded it, and copters usually reserved for the SAS were on hand. After the next few days, a C-5 Galaxy from America, used to transport planes and other aircraft, was diverted from Germany to the airbase, and the mystery vehicle was presumably loaded aboard. Also spotted was a Boeing 737 T-43 with the red and white markings of EG&G, the same company that runs the infamous Janet Airlines in and out of Area 51. The UK government has officially denied anything happened at the base in September of 1994, despite investigations from specialist media with sources inside the base. It's understandable why, at the time, such an incident would have been kept a secret, but the continued silence on the subject and what actually the aircraft was has left the Boscombe Down incident a mystery. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.